December 19, 1944, Verdun, France. General Dwight Eisenhower stood before a room of the most powerful military commanders in Europe. The faces around that table belonged to men who had planned D-Day, who had liberated Paris, who had pushed the German Wehrmacht back across France. But that morning, those faces showed something rare: fear. 3 days earlier, Hitler had launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. 200,000 German soldiers and nearly 1,000 tanks had smashed through the Ardennes forest, a sector the Allies considered quiet. The American line hadn't bent, it had shattered. 2 entire infantry divisions, the 106th and 28th, were being annihilated. The 101st Airborne was surrounded at a crossroads town called Bastogne. If Bastogne fell, the Germans would reach the Meuse River, and if they crossed the Meuse, they could split the Allied armies in half and capture Antwerp, the Allies' main supply port. Eisenhower needed solutions. He needed them now. He turned to the commander of Third Army, a man whose pearl-handled revolvers and profane vocabulary had made him the most controversial general in the American military. "George," Eisenhower asked, "how soon can you attack?" George S. Patton didn't hesitate. "December 22nd, he said, with 3 divisions. The room went silent. Some of the officers laughed, assuming it was a joke. It had to be a joke. Patton's Third Army was 100 miles south of Bastogne, engaged in their own offensive in the Saar region. To attack the German flank in 3 days, Patton would need to disengage from the enemy, turn an entire army 90 degrees north, move over 100,000 men through freezing weather on icy roads, and attack one of the largest German offensives of the war. Military doctrine said it couldn't be done. The logistics alone would take weeks to plan. Patton had already planned it. What Eisenhower didn't know was that Patton had anticipated the German attack. While other commanders dismissed intelligence warnings, Patton had ordered his staff to develop contingency plans days before the offensive began. He had 3 plans ready. Plan A sent 1 corps north. Plan B sent 2. Plan C sent 3. Before Patton had left for Verdun, he'd called his chief of staff and spoken one word: Plan A. By the time Eisenhower approved the attack, Third Army was already moving. The next 48 hours would become one of the most extraordinary feats in military history. Patton demanded what he called superhuman effort from every man in Third Army, and superhuman is exactly what he got. Consider what had to happen. The 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division had to break contact with German forces they were actively fighting. They had to turn their entire logistical operation, field depots, ammunition dumps, field hospitals, supply lines, and redirect everything north. They had to move tens of thousands of vehicles on roads that were either frozen solid or choked with mud. They had to do this while under intermittent German air attack, and they had to do it in December in the Ardennes, where temperatures dropped to 5 degrees below zero at night. Patton didn't sit in a command post and watch. He climbed into his jeep and drove directly to the front lines. His driver, Sergeant Mims, would later recall that Patton spent more time in forward positions during the Bulge than in his own headquarters. When traffic jammed on the roads, Patton got out and directed vehicles himself. When officers complained of impossible timetables, Patton told them to make them possible. On December 20th, Patton issued General Order 367, which included a prayer for fair weather written by Chaplain James O'Neill. Patton had ordered the prayer printed on 250,000 cards and distributed to every soldier in Third Army. The next day, the skies cleared, allowing Allied aircraft to finally fly and attack the German supply lines. Patton would later award the Bronze Star to Chaplain O'Neill for his role in what Patton called the best prayer he'd ever heard. On December 22nd, exactly as promised, the 4th Armored Division attacked toward Bastogne. But reaching the surrounded paratroopers would require 5 more days of some of the bloodiest fighting of the war. And it would require acts of courage so extraordinary that 21 soldiers who fought under Patton's command during the Battle of the Bulge would receive the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can bestow. This is the story of 3 of those men. Isidore Jackman was 22 years old, a Jewish kid from Berlin, Maryland, a town so small it didn't have a traffic light. Before the war, he'd worked at a gas station. Now he led a rifle squad in Company B, 513th Paratrooper Infantry Regiment, 17th Airborne Division. On January 4, 1945, Jackman's company was dug in near Flamigère, Belgium. The Germans had launched a counterattack with infantry and tanks. 2 German Mark V Panthers, 47 tons of armor, and a 75mm cannon were rolling directly toward his company's position. The Panthers opened fire on the American foxholes. Men died where they crouched, others ran. The company's line was collapsing. Jackman didn't run. He grabbed a bazooka from a wounded soldier and sprinted into the open, directly toward the tanks. The Panthers' machine guns opened up on him. Bullets kicked up snow around his boots. He kept running. At close range, close enough for the crew to see his face, Jackman knelt, aimed, and fired. The rocket struck the lead Panther. The tank lurched to a stop, damaged. Jackman didn't wait. He reloaded, turned toward the second tank, and fired again. The second rocket hit home. Both tanks were now disabled or destroyed. The German infantry, without their armor support, fell back. Jackman's company held their ground. But as Staff Sergeant Jackman moved to take cover, German machine gun fire found him. Isidore Jackman died in the snow near Flamigère. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. The citation reads that he displayed magnificent courage and heroic initiative, and that his actions saved the lives of many of his comrades. He was 22 years old. Junior Spurrier was a captain in the 134th Infantry Regiment, 35th Infantry Division. The 35th was part of Patton's Third Army, and on November 13, 1944, Spurrier's company was attacking the fortified village of Airdennes, France. Airdennes wasn't Bastogne. It wasn't one of the famous battles. It was just another village, another objective, another cluster of stone buildings that had to be taken house by house. But for the men who fought there, it was everything. Spurrier's company advanced into Airdennes under heavy fire. German machine guns covered every street. Artillery shells screamed overhead. The attack stalled. Captain Junior Spurrier did something that would define his Medal of Honor action. He went forward alone. Armed with his rifle and hand grenades, Spurrier worked his way through the streets of Airdennes. He came upon a German machine gun position, killed 3 of the crew, and captured the gun. He moved on. He found another enemy position, killed its defenders, moved on again. By the end of the day, Captain Junior Spurrier had personally killed 25 German soldiers and captured 2 machine guns. His one-man assault had broken the German defense, allowing his company to take the village. His citation notes that he acted with complete disregard for his personal safety and demonstrated intrepidity and bold leadership.
Unlike Jackman, Spurrier survived the war. He returned to his hometown of Catoosa, Oklahoma, where he lived until 1984. But the men who served with him never forgot that day in Airdennes, when their captain walked into enemy fire alone and won. Leonard Funk was 28 years old, a paratrooper with the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. He stood 5'5" and weighed 135 pounds. He looked like an accountant, not a soldier. On January 29, 1945, Funk's unit was mopping up German resistance near Holzheim, Belgium. During the operation, Funk and his men captured approximately 80 German prisoners. They gathered the prisoners in a building and left a small guard detail while Funk led the rest of his platoon to clear other enemy positions. When Funk returned, he walked into a nightmare. A German patrol had arrived while he was gone. They had overpowered the guards, freed the prisoners, and rearmed them. Funk walked straight into 90 armed German soldiers. His own men were now the prisoners, hands raised. A German officer pointed his gun at Funk's chest and demanded he surrender. Funk was carrying a Thompson submachine gun on a sling over his shoulder. He slowly began to remove the weapon as if to hand it over. Then he opened fire. In the chaos that followed, Funk killed 21 German soldiers and wounded many others. The surviving Germans threw down their weapons and surrendered. Funk's men grabbed the dropped weapons and helped secure the prisoners. Again. Leonard Funk received the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. His citation describes his response as audacious and notes that he displayed extraordinary heroism in the face of almost certain death. Funk survived the war and returned to Pennsylvania, where he worked for the Veterans Administration until his retirement. He died in 1992. The Army named a barracks at Fort Bragg in his honor. On December 26, 1944, 4 days after Patton's attack began, the lead tanks of the 4th Armored Division broke through the German encirclement and reached Bastogne. The siege was over. General Anthony McAuliffe, commander of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, had become famous 4 days earlier for his one-word reply to a German surrender demand, "Nuts." But McAuliffe knew his men couldn't hold forever. Supplies were running out. Ammunition was rationed to 10 rounds per man. The wounded were dying for lack of medical supplies. Patton had delivered. The cost had been severe. Third Army suffered 50,000 casualties during the Battle of the Bulge, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Across all Allied forces, the battle cost 89,000 American casualties, including 19,000 killed. It remains the bloodiest single battle the United States Army has ever fought. The Germans lost approximately 100,000 men and irreplaceable reserves of tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Hitler's last gamble had failed. The road to Berlin was open. Throughout the battle, Patton did something that distinguished him from most generals of the Second World War. He led from the front. His aide, Colonel Charles Codeman, documented Patton's movements during the Bulge. Patton visited forward positions almost daily, often driving through areas under artillery fire or within range of German small arms. He believed soldiers fought harder when they knew their commander was sharing their risk. "Wars are fought by men," Patton wrote in his diary, "and you have to be seen by them, sharing their dangers if you expect them to give their best." On one occasion during the Bulge, Patton's Jeep came under fire while visiting the 26th Infantry Division. Rather than retreat, Patton got out of the vehicle and began directing traffic, sending vehicles into cover while standing exposed in the road. His driver begged him to take cover. Patton refused until the column had cleared. The men of Third Army responded to this leadership. They marched when they were exhausted. They fought when they were freezing. They attacked when military logic said they should defend, not because they were ordered to, but because their general was with them in the cold and the mud and the fire. Of the 21 men who earned the Medal of Honor during the Battle of the Bulge while serving under Patton's command, not one of their citations mentions the general by name. The medals were earned by individual soldiers making individual choices in individual moments of terror and courage. But those moments happened in an army that Patton had trained, inspired, and led from the front.
Many of the 21 Medal of Honor recipients from the Battle of the Bulge didn't live to receive their medals. Their awards were presented to mothers, fathers, wives, and children who would never see their sons and husbands again. Staff Sergeant Isidore Jockman's mother accepted his medal in a ceremony she attended dressed in black. Private First Class Melvin Biddle, who killed 17 German soldiers and captured 10 more while working alone ahead of his company, survived the war, but carried shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life. Sergeant Archer Gammon threw himself on a German grenade to save his squad. The grenade didn't detonate. Gammon thought he had seconds to live and chose to use those seconds to save others. He received his Medal of Honor while still recovering from the wounds he'd sustained in the fighting before that moment. These men weren't superhuman. They were gas station attendants and farmers and clerks and teachers. They were 22-year-olds who had never been more than 50 miles from home before the Army put them on a troop ship. They were ordinary Americans who, in moments when courage mattered most, found something extraordinary inside themselves. When Patton demanded 48 hours of superhuman effort, he was asking men to do what seemed impossible. And they did it. Not because they were born heroes, but because they chose to be. George C. Patton died on December 21, 1945, from injuries sustained in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. He never saw peacetime America again. He was 60 years old. He's buried in the Luxembourg American Cemetery among the men who served under his command. His grave is marked with a simple white cross, identical to those around it, just as he requested. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945, when the last German units retreated to their starting positions. The German army never recovered. 83 days later, Hitler was dead, and the war in Europe was over. But what happened in those frozen Ardennes forests during December 1944 and January 1945 remains one of the defining moments of American military history. Not because of the generals who planned it, but because of the young men who fought it. 21 of them earned the Medal of Honor. Thousands more earned something that couldn't be pinned on a uniform. They earned the knowledge that when their country needed superhuman effort, they gave it. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this history with more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing forgotten stories out of the archives every week. Stories about ordinary men who became extraordinary when it mattered most. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching. Tell us if you had family who served in the Bulge or in any war. This community stretches across the world, and every one of you helps keep these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering.